Well, welcome to Marinette. We're here in the beautiful theater on the bay at the UW Marinette campus, next to the gracious and beautiful shores of Green Bay. Our presentation this evening is by Bill Cook. He's the forester and biologist for the MSU Extension, so Michigan State University Extension. But he headed southwest to Marinette to talk to us about this evening, as he does a little bit of work in northern Wisconsin as well as the UP and a little bit down in downstate Michigan.
Well, thanks, Scott. This is kind of fun to cross the river, to be over in Marinette. I do it all the time. I grew up in Madison. I went to school at Stevens Point, so it's kind of fun I never really quite recognized the border there, except for that time change zone to the weird eastern side when I get over to Delta County. But anyway, happy to hear that this Northern Lights series is going on and be part of it. It's kind of fun to be one of the Michiganders to be here. So I'm pleased that I was asked, Scott and Tom, so thank you very much. But anyway, I'm a forester. I'm a wildlife biologist. Been doing this for a while, working with folks, helping them to better understand some of these ideas, manage their own properties, working with state and federal governments and companies and consulting foresters and other interesting people. It's a fun community to work with. I've always enjoyed it, and I probably will enjoy it for another 5 or 6 years. Then I'll enjoy something else, I hope. But anyway, this is a question that often comes up when I talk to folks, is why bother to manage a forest? Doesn't nature do things just fine? And the answer is mixed. Mostly no. But we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along here. I'm going to start out with some whys, talk about some hows, and then we'll go back to some whys. But the short story of why you would manage them is you get more stuff. That's what I tell my elementary school kids. You get more stuff. Until I walked into one classroom and I found out that stuff wasn't allowed by the teacher, the word. The teacher wanted students to be more explicit than just stuff. But you get more stuff, whatever that might be, and that can be a wide range of things, and the types of things and the numbers of things and the diversity of things have grown over the last 40 or 50 years, as you might expect. At one point, it was mostly timber driven. That's still an important part of the process, but now there's many more considerations wrapped into that. Bruce Zobel was a geneticist. He died not too terribly long ago, at least in my viewpoint. But he had an interesting comment to say about forest management. And pretty much it's that we're going to put more and more demands on our forests, and we're going to have to do it with fewer and fewer forests, possibly in poorer and poorer condition, facing greater numbers of threats. So you can see that there are some challenges that lie ahead for us, because forests are not merely a recreational commodity or something like that. They're not frivolous. They're not something that's nice to have when you have the spare time. We depend on them. Our survival depends on forests, as it does with many other things as well. But forests usually aren't on the top of people's lists when they think of what they need to get through the day or the week. Okay, so you get more stuff. Talk a little bit about how we get more stuff. This is one definition of forestry, and the important part of this phrase is the benefit of society. Foresters manage forests because they like forests. We like forests. It's fun. We'd rather talk to trees than people. They're basically more interesting most of the time, and they don't talk back. So it works really, really well. But actually, all of us are out there because we're working for the benefit of society to produce more of those commodities and services that forests provide to human beings. I'm not going to talk a lot about forest ecology, but there's a couple of things I just have to get in there. One is this concept of succession. It's really, really important in forests and other biological systems. Essentially, it's a change over time from one kind of vegetation type to another kind of vegetation type. These systems are dynamic. They're not static. If you go back tomorrow and look at the forest you look at today, it might look the same. It probably will. But if you come back as little as 5 years later, there are going to be some changes in there. And those of you who own forest property are well aware of that. Well, this process of succession can be manipulated. Management can speed it up, they can slow it down, it can hold it in a place for a while, it can change direction. We have choices with management. That's part of what makes management kind of interesting. This is another one. This is a really important forest concept. Dots. Dots are important to foresters, okay? What this represents, of course, are tree stems. If you look at them from the top, every acre is covered with a certain percentage or certain amount of square feet of dots. Now, you can have a lot of little dots, you can have a fewer amount of big dots, you can have a lot of big dots, you can have mix of different sized dots, but all those dots added up is a concept that we use to measure stand density, because stand density regulates light, which is more than just a little important for forests and forest organisms. And so that's one of the things that we can manipulate, is the amount of light in the forest, and that term is something foresters call basal area. That has to do with the high stumps of the trees, the base, the area of all those bases. It happens to be at 4.5 feet, not at stump height, but that area is added up, and that's a measure, a very critical measure in forest ecology and forest management. Now we're going to jump from ecology and talk a little bit about silviculture, which is the analog of agriculture, except silviculture involves thousands of species instead of 1 or 2 or 3, plus the soils and the waters and the other non-living components go along with a forest. And this research has gone on for about 100 years. In the Lake States here, we pretty much have some good systems in place to do different kinds of things depending on what the forest owner might want and what the forests and the soils have the possibility to provide. Obviously, in northern Wisconsin, we're not going to be growing a whole lot of eucalyptus. That's not a possibility. If that's what you want, it's going to involve a residence change for you. But up here, we do have some limitations of winter and soils and weather and other things like that. But within those constraints, there's a whole lot of wiggle room in most cases. Oh, I want to go back to that one there, because the silvicultural system will do at least 2 of 3 things, or else it's not good forestry. One, it'll produce timber products. That we're all familiar with. But more importantly, and what drives most of these systems, is securing regeneration. Now, if it doesn't secure regeneration, it's not a silvicultural system. And in some forest types, the silvicultural system will improve the trees and the forest conditions after a harvest, a thinning, or some other practice, rather than degrade them. And that's an important difference as well. So it's a series of practices in the woods to do certain things within the constraints of the environment to provide more stuff. It can be a lot of fun. We have 3 basic silvicultural systems in the Lake States: clear cutting, shelter wooding, selection system, and then some things that don't fit into those so well we call intermediate treatments, and then there's this planting thing that we like to call artificial regeneration, but it's planting. And some of these systems involve even-aged trees. Some of our forests that have different ages. A note on natural regeneration: it's a common thought among many that we should plant 2 trees or something like that for every tree that we cut. Well, I think that's hooey. It's a whole lot better to provide environmental conditions and have natural regeneration produce hundreds or thousands of trees for every tree that we cut, and then we don't have to plant. And those of you who have planted a lot of trees on weekends in April or in the fall know that it's fun for about 10 minutes, and then it becomes work. And it's also expensive. And so in our systems in the Lake States, we depend largely on natural regeneration and, again, manipulating those environmental factors in the forest to encourage trees to regenerate on their own, which when it comes right down to it, they're basically pretty good at doing that all by themselves, given a halfway decent chance. And then, of course, there's 4 different ways trees reproduce in the Lake States. Seeds, of course, most common, but we've got a few other systems or mechanisms that can work as well. Now, here's the big bad word: clear cutting. I won't even ask how many of you think clear cutting is a fun thing to do, because I pretty much know what the answer is. But hopefully you're going to retrain our eyes just a little bit this evening to help you understand that clear cutting is really just a method that mimics, not copies exactly, but mimics natural disturbances. Ecologists call them catastrophic disturbance. Things like wildfire, windstorm, major floodings, huge insect defoliations that kill thousands of acres of trees. Those are major catastrophic disturbances, and a lot of our tree species are dependent upon that kind of disturbance for their survival. They're adapted to it. Clear cutting mimics many of those systems, and we're getting better at clear cutting to try to make them more similar to natural disturbances, but it still has a bad name to it. Essentially, it removes all the trees, which makes people sad. Of course, I like baby trees, so I don't mind seeing the baby trees in a clear cut. If I know that it's been done properly at the right time in the right circumstances, there are lots of baby trees out there. In addition to all those baby trees, there's a whole new suite of wildlife species that are going to utilize that area. And a whole new suite again as it begins to grow up, and as it matures, a whole new suite of wildlife again. It's an interesting cycle over the long term. But many people, if this is in their backyard, they tend not to like it so much. And the change in visual quality is important, and that is a downside to clear cutting. But so is a tornado, and so is a wildfire. And so these things are part of our lives. Shelter wooding is, to a certain degree, sort of a modified clear cut, but we don't take the trees out all at once. We take them out in 2 or 3 successive waves, and the whole idea is to help that forest establish regeneration if it's not there already, and then nurse that regeneration to sapling size or larger, which usually is best done under partial light for these kinds of tree species and forest types. And then once the new forest is established, we have the option of going in and removing the remainder of trees, and sometimes we'll do that and sometimes we won't do that. Of course, the trees that remain need some special conditions too. They need to be wind firm, and they be able to withstand certain kinds of pressures, or else they blow down or break or crack up or suffer from ice or other things. So it can't be done with all tree species, but it can be done with some of our forest types. Now, this is everybody's perennial favorite, and it's probably the most misunderstood silvicultural system that we have, the selection system. That's where we only go and take a few trees out. The visual quality changes are minimal. We can suffer through the timber products extraction, and then we still have our nice forest left behind. Unfortunately, you can select the wrong trees just as easily as you can select the right trees. And so knowing which trees to cut, harvest, and thin out is important, because many times on our private lands especially, somebody will come and do a select cut, and the forest that you have left over is not exactly what you had been hoping for. So there is some skill that goes in with this system, more than the other two systems, because no two foresters will agree on the exact same set of trees to harvest under this kind of system. And it's very malleable and flexible in terms of other considerations in the forest, such as wildlife habitat or soil and water protection or quality timber production. On the far end of that, the extreme end of that, is a crop tree idea. This is popular among hunters that like to grow oak trees for the acorns to drop to feed the deer. On the top frame, on the right-hand side, the green trees with the CTs, those are the crop trees. In this case, in this example, say oak trees, will remove most of the trees around those crop trees to give those trees more light, more photosynthate, more rapid growth, healthier trees in that area. So we can use that concept to grow acorns or veneer or fruit or other things that might be of interest to a landowner. This is a quick and dirty way to compare these two extreme systems of clear cutting and selection system. No one system is actually better than the other one if they're applied in the right situation, and both of them are damaging forest practices when they're applied in the wrong forest type or the wrong situation. So the selection system, for example, in an aspen stand is one fast way to degrade your aspen stand and prevent it from regenerating. It just doesn't work. And so there's a few items to compare in there. A few notes on intermediate treatments. These are the things that don't fit quite perfectly well in a silvicultural system, but are sometimes needed in a forest for one purpose or another. Not going to talk about all of these, but I am going to focus a little bit on timber stand improvement, because this is, or now it's often just called stand improvement, because foresters are beginning politically correct and we drop the word timber, even though we really mean timber. We're talking about stand improvement, but actually stand improvement can be for other resources and values as well. But whatever those resources and values are, some of the trees can be removed, sometimes on a commercial, sometimes on a pre-commercial basis if the landowner wishes to do so. And after the timber stand improvement, we have a better looking stand and a stand that has more attributes according to the landowner. And again, planting. We usually only think about sticking the trees in the ground, but that's the short part of the long window. In urban forestry, we often say it's a whole lot better to put a $100 tree or a $10 tree in a $100 hole than a $100 tree in a $10 hole. It's all about the site preparation. If you don't prepare your site, and if you don't follow up with the competing vegetation, you're going to suffer what nature has in store for those trees, which is high mortality rates. Nature is out to kill us. And if you don't think so, just talk to a microbiologist someday, or read Dan Riskin's book, by the way. He wrote a book called Nature is Trying to Kill You. It's humorous, but it's very science-based, and it kind of flouts some of the common popular views of nature and what is quote-unquote natural. Natural is not always a good thing. But anyway, artificial regeneration is used, planting is sometimes used, when for one reason or another natural regeneration fails, or we want to convert the site to another forest type that might not be there right now, such as aspen to red pine might be an example. We also manage forests for protection. So we look at a landscape, there's a lot of things out there trying to damage forests. Biological, abiological, human-induced, climate change. Other things are out there that are putting pressures on our forests. Now, there are diseases, both native and exotic. And there are insects, both native and exotic. And then there's the fun one, which is fire. Everybody loves a good fire. It always makes the news. So I'm going to talk about one fire that occurred in Michigan, because it's one of the largest in the Upper Lake states in many years. It was over 20,000 acres. It was a lightning fire that the only thing that stopped it was Lake Superior. So it was pretty interesting. Fast-moving, jack pine, mature trees, crown fire, very dangerous, burned up lots of buildings. Fortunately, it was in a part of the UP where there wasn't a whole lot of buildings or a whole lot of people. Otherwise, it could have been disastrous. But a few photos from that. There's Lake Superior with smoke plume coming off that early in the fire, and then later on in the fire as it grew. And here's what it looked like on one of the fingers that came off that fire. And if you were unfortunate enough to be on the ground, this is where you turn around and run. And this is when it's too late to run. These are all fires from the Duck Lake. It burned for several days, overnight and another day. And we had a lot of equipment working on that. We drew it from many different places to put out the fire. Here's the aftermath. This is what nature is trying to do. This is nature's way to do a clear cut, for example. And this was a pretty hot and dangerous fire. It didn't leave much behind. It looks disastrous, but you go back to this area today and there's a lot of things growing in there. Jack pine regenerates fairly well after the fire, and the regeneration did return. Again, natural isn't always better, even though it does occur. A few other threats. So there have been some large fires in northern Wisconsin, but our Lake State's fire control efforts have been largely successful. We wheeled the fires down to usually double-digit fires from million-acre plus fires we had 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It was very devastating. But there are more forest threats out there that I think are more important than insects or diseases or fire, although those are the ones that get the headlines. There's these exotic species, some of which are game changers in forest ecology. Real serious issue. Deer depredation. That's a very them are fighting words in a lot of places in northern Wisconsin and the UP. I've said this in front of a group of loggers before, or not a group of loggers, a group of hunters before, and if looks could kill, I would have been dead dozens of times over. Because there are different ways to look at deer, but one way is their impact in the landscape on forest regeneration of the understory, the shrub layer, and young trees. And the impacts are indisputable. They're severe in many parts of Wisconsin and the UP and the northern lower part of Michigan. Not so sure there's a whole lot we can do about it politically, but it is something to be concerned about. And then benign neglect is a term that I use for many people who own forest land who just don't want to do anything. That's their right. That's their prerogative. They can do that. I would support them in doing that, in expressing their right, but I would also hope that I could change their mind and to manage that forest to get more of the stuff that they might want out of their forest. The fourth one there is a little counterintuitive. The loss of forest industry is a threat to forests. Forest industry provides the products that you and I use. Our toilet paper, our coffee, our telephone poles, all the things that we use. We use roughly 4 to 6 pounds of wood every single day. Each one of us on average in the United States. It needs to come from somewhere. Industry provides that. Now, industry also provides a market for the cut products from the forest. Forest management happens because it's a commercial enterprise. People get paid. Otherwise, these practices aren't going to happen. There aren't too many landowners that are going to spend much of their lives removing and manipulating trees and doing different things at no cost or at their own expense. It just won't happen. So the loss of a vibrant forest industry is key to a vibrant forest management set of choices and a good forest health across the lake states. And the last one, urban sprawl and splatter, I think most of us are familiar with. Urban sprawl, we're all familiar with. Urban splatter is my term for what happens in the Northwoods when John Q. Public retires from Milwaukee and buys a little piece of heaven in Minocqua, and all of a sudden you have Minocqua. And so then there's a lot of people that are moving into these forested areas, which is a nice thing if you're those people, but it also presents management challenges as the parcels get smaller and smaller and more people move in that don't like the sound of machinery or the look of a logging truck or the sawmill that's down the road. Forest threats, some exotic species, 3 of them are here. There are more than this. Upper left is our friend the emerald ash borer, which I think most of the folks in Wisconsin are now familiar with. It came to the United States via Detroit Harbor, first discovered, identified in 2002, but it probably had been chewing its way through the forest and being distributed by nurseries and firewood users for at least 10 years prior to that. On the right-hand side is the emerald ash, or the Asian longhorn beetle. This is scary. That one is scary. It's not here yet. The nearest location is in southern Ohio. There's more in Toronto and Worcester, Mass. It was eradicated, we're pretty sure, in Chicago. There are parts of New Jersey, other states where it's popped up. We do not want that here. The center one is hemlock woolly adelgid. That's not here yet either. But the lake states, the upper lake states, has the last large reserves of eastern hemlock on the continent. The rest of them have been devastated by this particular exotic species of a juice sucker, essentially. That's what an adelgid is. It's roughly sort of like an aphid, although its structure and life cycles are a little bit different, but the effect is largely the same. But it's killed thousands and thousands of acres of hemlock in the eastern states. One we don't immediately think about as a why to manage is a family resource. Most of us can remember going to the woods as a kid. Some of us still do it. Some of us own land just for this reason. It's a good way to draw together different generations. They can work on the forest. They can play in the forest. They can help harvest timber, thin trees, pull exotic species, watch for this, that, or the other thing. It's a great way to pull families together, and considering an inheritance of that property is also important. Most of the private land in the lake states are owned by old white guys like me, and we're not going to be on the planet forever. And so if we want to be prudent, we're going to think about how we're going to pass that land along to others and involve our heirs in the process of how to do that, what to do, and manage accordingly. Winding down here, health, maintenance, and restoration are other reasons to manage forests. As things get messed up in one way or another, to a certain degree, they can be fixed, mitigated, or possibly turned around. This, many people might argue, is a beautiful forest. This is a highly dysfunctional forest. This is a forest that's in real serious trouble. It's beautiful, but ecologically, it's a mess. There's no regeneration in here. There's not likely to be any regeneration in here, and it presents some major management challenges. So one of the things I'd like to leave with you tonight is visual quality really is a crappy way to assess a forest condition. It looks nice, it appeals to our human senses, but forests don't work that way. They work with their own devices and their own ecology. So just because it looks good or just because it looks bad doesn't necessarily mean it is good or is bad. We need to know a little bit more about ecology. Lastly, why manage a forest? Habitat. Here's the big reason right there. It's both a beautiful creature and it's a nemesis in the forest. Full of contradictions, full of controversy, difficult to decide what to do from a public policy standpoint. Do we manage for these kind of wildlife? Probably not. In the lake states, we've got roughly 600 species of vertebrates alone, the majority of which depend on forests for at least part of their life cycle. Most of them we couldn't even name. If you take a group of, try it sometime at a party, 30 people or so, try to name a wildlife species without repeating one. See if you can get through 30 people. It's an interesting endeavor. On my own property, I manage for wildlife, but not necessarily for deer. I burn regularly because I like some of these creatures. In these upland shrub grassy areas, which is becoming an increasingly endangered habitat as these areas are developed. That's a crane. We have cranes on our property, which when I was going to school, cranes were unusual. You didn't see them in the 1970s. I mean, Aldo Leopold wrote an elegy to the crane because he felt pretty sure they were going to go extinct. Well, they didn't. And of course, on my property, I have 3 painting grounds for woodcock. I've taught my kids to enjoy painting. One of my daughters and I even got up in the wee hours of the morning in sleeping bags and slept on the edge of one waiting for the male to come out, and he actually did the dance for her, and she hasn't forgotten that. And I also manage for harriers because I manage for small mammals. That brings in the harriers, and I like harriers. So there's a lot of reasons to manage. This document, for those of you in Wisconsin, is real helpful. It's Forest Management Guidelines. There's a URL on there. It's longer than it needs to be, but if you just type in a browser, Wisconsin Forest Management Guidelines, this will pop up near the top. And finally, if there are any questions, I'm going to leave this up here for just a moment or two or until they cut me off. Here's some high points of what I was talking about this evening. So any questions at this point? Well, thank you very much. Have a good evening.